Now, if you remember this getting your feet wet demo, left things off here, but I wanted to use this as an opportunity to address drawing and watercolor. So what I wanted to show you is how you can start combining other materials with watercolor drawing materials so that you can see how it can work in collaboration with media such as pastel. So this is where I ended things up here. So now what I want to do is use some pastels to further develop, but I want to be careful not to completely cover up my watercolor here, okay? Otherwise then it's pointless to even start with it if you're going to hide it all. So one of the first things I wanted to do was address the sky and articulate that somewhat. And you know, I was a little unhappy with the grayness that we're looking at here. So I wanted to lighten it up, and I'm just going to take some white pastel and I'm just going to lightly scrub using the flat side to bring a little more light to it. And I'm gonna add a little more color to the sky, but at the top, so that there's a little variation in the blue. And I'm probably also going to add a little light to it. Now here's one of the things I like about, even though I use the full sheet, the demonstration only utilized this area here. And so I used this to show you the other technique of applying watercolor to dry paper. But now I can use it as a testing area. So I want to, just use it to clean off my pastel, because I've got them all combined together, so there's a little offset. And I want to make sure the color is pure as possible. So I'm going to use a little of this over the top, this kind of teal green here, just so that I get a little more dimension in the color of the sky. And I'm going to also add and bring a little white to it to lighten it up as well. Okay. And you see these little imperfections that happened here as a result of the brush irregularity of the brushwork. Well, now I want to maybe turn those into more like cloud-like elements, and I'm going to take advantage of that and use it to break up the sky with a little more aggressive placement of this white to suggest shadow forms, or cloud forms, excuse me. And see if I can do this without getting my head in the picture frame. Okay, it's just to kind of maybe make that sky a little more complex by breaking it up with some of these cloud forms here. I'm even going to maybe suggest a little trace of color in those clouds by using this kind of cream color or salmon color. Just a little scrape here and there, and then a little white over the top of that, and then I've got something other than blue and something other than white in the clouds. Now of course, after I'm done, I'm going to need to spray this with fixative. I'm going to come back to the foreground here and lay in some information. One of the things I wanted to try to do is to kind of suggest that sedimentary rock formation here to break up the bulkiness of the shape here. So I'm going to run some of the striated pattern by just using a little black and using the corner edge of it, and maybe adding some variation to the design by showing the horizontal movement, but with a more linear fashion here. I'm going to take a little color and I go over some of those lines so that they're not entirely so neutral. Take a little red and retrace over some of those. Okay. And I also want to bring out some ridges. So I'm going to use a little of this light color that I brought into the sky and create a little bit of variation in the surface there, and create some pockets of dark as well, so that there's a little less evenness in the appearance of this mountain structure or cliff structure here. And just to give us a little variation. Okay. Even within there, something a tad darker. Again, you see, I'm trying to use the flat side as well as the edge of the pastel so as to keep me from going and jumping in too heavy-handed with it. Kind of distinguish that edge a little and separate it from the foreground. And I take a little orange, something that's a little closer to rust color, so that again I can have a little variation in color as well. A little bit of that rust color will contrast nicely with the blue up above and give me a little more dramatic situation. Now the fixative I would use is I'd use a workable so that it'll allow me to go back in it if I need to make some slight adjustments here. I still think down below I want to create a little more drama to set up the lighter green in the foreground. So I'm going to rub a little of that black and rub a little of the rust into it. Okay. Now there's one other tool that can be interesting to use. You don't need to run out and buy these, but they do come in useful when you're wanting to integrate watercolor with drawing. And these are watercolor pencils. And so I'm going to do a little work with these. You dip them in the water, just the tip. You dip the tip in the water, and then you can come back and draw into the area. And of course the moisture loosens the watercolor and allows it to become activated. So I can do both linear, but I can also do flat. I can use the flat side of it and create a shape that's bulkier, and it still is watercolor. And I'm going to do that to some of these dark shapes down in here. I'm going to intensify them by bringing a little watercolor back. Even though I put pastel down, this is going to push the pastel away and allow us to get and return some watercolor back to the image. And you can see the dark is a little more dramatic. Of course, a lot of it has to do because it's wet right now. Okay. And I'm going to do a little bit up at the top as well. It's going to kind of tap with the watercolor pencil so that it makes a more organic type of mark suitable for the subject that I'm dealing with. I'm going to work a little of the negative space to help set up that light green in that plant or brush. Let me put a little, I still feel like I want a little more of that down in here. Okay, so now I want to work a little with some greens and yellows down in the foreground. So I'm going to pick up, and I even work with a little yellow. I'm going to pick up a little green and work some of that in here to get a slight suggestion of definition here. Because we are in the foreground, so I would expect to see that you have a little more definition, but yet I don't want to turn this into a traditional drawing, you know, as to keep the looseness of watercolor evident and just kind of provide contrast so that everything isn't just shape oriented, but that I do have some areas where I can alter the color, add a little yellow to that green there as well, see that? And I'm going to add some yellow down here in the foreground. That area that's kind of got a little blue in it, well, now a little yellow where the top has turned that green, but it's a different green from the one that I started out with over on the left side, or the right side, excuse me. Okay. I'm going to take and do a little point work now. And suggest a little stuff here in the grass, the foreground, some texture. I'm not covering everything up that is here. And you can use the color, the pencil, the watercolor pencil dry. You don't have to dip it in water all the time. It'll leave you a texture very much like colored pencil, but if it does get wet, it'll make it fluid. So I'm going to do the same thing with some yellow, is I'm just going to agitate the ground with a little bit of some lighter yellow here. And come back to a little green, the dark green, and also add some marks over on this side. Maybe swipe it down a notch by putting a little yellow over the top. Okay, liking the way that looks. Come back with a little of the brown again, or the black, and I'm going to set up and darken this negative space back there. You notice how I'm drawing. It's almost as though like I'm holding a paintbrush. I'm not working with my head to the grindstone. And that's a way of maintaining a fresh, loose quality rather than turning it into refined drawing. And that way you respect some of the gestural and loose qualities of watercolor painting, and not try to make it something that it's not or that it shouldn't be. Okay, I could probably do a little bit more stuff in there. I might even throw in a little bit of green hanging out right in here. And I'd probably use a little watercolor. I just broke the point on that. Or maybe even use a little pastel as though there's some dried out vegetation hanging out from the side of the cliff, so that there's a variation in that surface. Perhaps maybe doing a similar thing down in here is maybe enlivening this with a little yellow. And throwing a little green in there as well for good measure, so that we're breaking up a little of that color of rust with something just a tad different in warmth and perhaps even cooler. Right? Okay. Now, just so that you can, see this in a different light, so to speak, I want to and also give me a chance to tell you how to take tape off, just so that you can see this in a cleaner environment. When you take the tape off, pull away slowly. Pull away slowly, don't be in a hurry. Even though this is supposed to be easy tape to pull off, don't, whoops, bumped my head into that. Sorry about that, camera jitter. Pull away. And now you can see another advantage to using the tape to hold down your paper, because it certainly helps keep it flat, but it also gives you a really nice clean presentation. Now what I would do is certainly I'd spray this and then look at it for a while and decide what else I might want to do. But the workable fixative will give this a chance to stick. And of course, what I like about the pencils is that they do return some watercolorness back, so that every drawing tool doesn't have to be pastel, because then it becomes real easy to get carried away and start to cover all of your watercolor with pastel, and then you basically lose its presence in the work. All right, so let's leave it at that. So those of you that are in the section for drawing might want to, consider implementing some of this when you get around to like the third project. Okay, but let's use the first project to really get ourselves acquainted with watercolor and paint application of watercolor before you start getting into mixing materials. Okay? All right, we'll catch you in the next video. Thank you.